Hey students, today we're going to talk about elements of mystery and suspense. There are a few different things that makes a mystery in terms of plot, and we have four of them plus one here. So every mystery needs a problem. There has to be a puzzle, something that has to be solved, something that needs to be uncovered. It can be a murder, but it doesn't have to be. A lot of times it is. But it can also be something like a theft or just a secret that people need to uncover. It also has to have suspense. So you need anticipation, anxious curiosity about what is going to happen next, maybe even fear that harm will come to a character. Think about dramatic irony. We know something that characters don't know, and that creates tension and suspense. We see that a lot in mystery novels and stories as well. Foreshadowing, you're going to see things early on in a story that seem unimportant, and they come back later and we realize they're very important. And then by the end, there's a solution. Most mysteries and good mysteries are going to wrap up most of the questions that you have. You have this resolution, this revealing of whatever secret needed to be uncovered, whatever problem needed to be solved. The last thing, and why I said plus one, good mysteries should be solvable by the audience. It needs to be believable, and the audience, the reader, should be able to figure it out by the end of the story. It doesn't mean you always will, but it should be a possibility that the audience could solve the mystery. It makes it more fun. Suspense, going a little deeper into that, it's not the suspense of horror. If you remember Gothic horror, we had gloom and doom. It is not the gloom and doom horror. The no one is safe. It's not that looming dread. It's the audience wants and is waiting for something to happen. It's surprise. It's intrigue, danger. It's an anticipation, an excitement about what is going to happen next. But it's not that gloom and doom of horror. Characters also make a mystery. So we have a few categories of characters. Victims. Obviously, the victim is the person who the crime was committed against. So if the crime is a murder, it's the person who got murdered. Your witnesses are the people who were around when it happened. So if the murder happens at this party, then the witnesses would be the people who are at the party that can provide evidence or information for our detective, which is our third category of character. Detective, investigator, we'll talk about them a little bit more in just a second. And then we have suspects, and we'll talk about them more as well. Our detective, our investigator, is normally going to be very intelligent. They are usually our protagonist, our main character, and their role, our second bullet point there, is to solve the mystery with us as the audience, as the reader. And we'll talk a little bit more about how they do that. They don't have to be law enforcement. It doesn't have to be a police officer, someone working for the FBI. It can be just someone who happens to sit by their window and sees a lot of the stuff that goes on in their community. It does not have to be law enforcement. A lot of times it is, but it doesn't have to be. We also have a sidekick assistant, and this is where when I talked about the second bullet point there, the solving the mystery with the audience, this is a lot of times how a writer does that. So we have a sidekick, an assistant. It's really the everyman character, usually not someone who's super intelligent. Maybe they're one step behind most of the time, and they're asking questions of the detective. And that's really important because the detective then has to explain things to this person, and thereby they're really explaining things to us as the reader. So the sidekick is really, really important. They help give us explanations to keep us on track with the detective. If we didn't have this sidekick, this everyman character, we might get to the end of a mystery and have no idea what's going on. So this is a really important character in a mystery, asks questions of the detective and keeps us on track so we know what's going on. Suspects, this is our last category, person thought to be guilty of the crime. They need these things here to be a suspect. So let's say there was a crime committed, a guy named Phil shows up dead, right? John is a suspect. John and Phil are old friends. John needs a motive to be a suspect. So maybe a couple years back, Phil stole a ton of money from John. That could be a reason, a motive that John has to kill Phil. John also needs a means or a method to commit the crime as well. So maybe John just purchased a heavy duty candlestick, and that could be his means or his method for killing John. And the last thing is opportunity or the timing to do it. So maybe John and Phil had they went on a backpacking trip and hung out at Phil's cabin in the woods. That would be definitely an opportunity for John to commit the crime. So you need those three things at least: motive, means, opportunity, to be a suspect. Be aware that your suspects sometimes turn into victims. As a detective, as a reader, it's helpful because it narrows the field. So then we don't have, if we start out with 10 suspects, we don't have 10 suspects at the end. We might have 2 or 3 to choose from to determine who the real criminal is. The third thing is clues that make a mystery. You have to have clues. There's not a ton to say about this aspect of mysteries. The clue leads us to the truth at the end of the mystery. We have a couple different categories of clues. You have obvious ones. This is plain sight. Say one of the suspects is always wearing a red scarf. Somebody finds a red scarf at the scene of the crime. That's an obvious clue. It's plain sight. We also have forensic evidence, which would be more scientific clues. Think of fingerprints and that type of stuff. And clues really provide excitement. They push the story forward. If there's ever a lull in a mystery, you can expect that a clue is probably going to be found or something big is going to happen next. So clues are really, really important in a mystery. But you got to be aware that we also have things called red herrings. And this is a false clue that is trying to distract you from the truth. So you might have this really strong feeling all of a sudden that this certain person is the criminal, the killer, whatever, the thief. But you might be basing that off of a red herring or a false clue that's just trying to mislead you away from the real truth when maybe the criminal is over here somewhere else. So red herrings are purposely distracting you, misleading you, and causes more intrigue, creates more intrigue for the reader. So be aware of red herrings so you don't get tripped up in mysteries as well. There's your elements of mystery and suspense, a few of them at least. Keep these in mind as you read, and I think you will be well on your way to becoming a wonderful literary detective.